Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Okay, we'll start with our dua. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. From the second page, Alright. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Allahumma salli wa sallim ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi fi kulli lahzatin abada ala ni'amillahi wa afdalihi. Allahumma adina min ladunka rahmah wa alimna min ladunka ilma subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. نويت تعلم وتعليم المذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ودعاء إلى الهدى ودلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى مع لطف وعافية برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم ألهمنا علما نفقه به أوامرك ونواهيك وارزقنا فهما نعرف به كيف نناجيك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم إنا نسألك فهم النبيين وحفظ المرسلين وإلهام الملائكة المقربين في عافية يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم أغننا بالعلم وزينا بالحلم وأكرمنا بالتقوى وجملنا بالعافية يا أرحم الراحمين. آمين. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم إنا نستودعك ما قرأناه وما نقرأه في هذا المجلس وما قبله وما بعده فاحفظه علينا حتى ترده إلينا وقت احتياجنا إليه يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم أكرمنا بنور الفهم وأخرجنا من ظلمات الوهم وافتح لنا أبواب رحمتك وانشر علينا حكمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. آمين. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم يا مقاليد الأمور كلها بيده وإليه يرجع الأمور كلها يا فتاح يا عليم يا فتاح يا عليم يا فتاح يا عليم افتح علينا فتحا قريبا. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي وسدد لساني وهدي قلبي وافعل كذلك بأحبابي أبدا وارزقنا كمال فتوح العارفين والفقه في الدين مع القمل الإخلاص والصدق واليقين والعافية والغنى والنصر والحفظ والنفع والانتفاع وخيرات الدارين وعلم الأول والآخر. آمين. صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد الفاتح من أغلق والخاتم السبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله وصحبه حق قدر مقداره العظيم. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد الفاتح من أغلق والخاتم السبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله وصحبه حق قدر مقداره العظيم. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد الفاتح من أغلق والخاتم السبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله وصحبه حق قدر مقداره العظيم. نوينا بدرستنا وتدريسنا لسيرة نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم مناجاة الله تعالى وابتغاء محبته ولقوله تعالى إن كنتم تحبون الله فاتبعوني يحببكم الله ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم. ونوينا اقتداء واهتداء بالنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ونوينا أن نزداد في محبته وقربه ونوينا ذلك لأهلنا وأقاربنا وأحبابنا وكل المسلمين جميعا يا رب العالمين. ونوينا أن بقراءة سيرة سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم أن ينتشر نوره في بلدنا وفي العالم كله. ونوينا ما نوى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم والسلف الصالح ونوينا أن نجمع معه في الدنيا يقظة وفي الآخرة في جنة الأعلى الفردوس مع أصحابه وأهله وكل فاتحة. Alhamdulillah. Okay. Right, we have reached Alhamdulillah. Last week, right, we finished up the where Sayyidah Halima took Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where she agreed to take him and then she went off with him. Alright. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Alright. So here, right, Sayyidah Halimahtussa'diyah, we'll go back a bit. Let me just see. Alright. So these are the points we're going to cover today, inshallah. Right, so his childhood in the household of Sayyidah Halima, and how it was for him and for her. Right, and I'm just going to take some verses, right, of poetry, right, that describe this event very, very beautifully. Right, a lot of these events, they are actually related, right, by some of the Sahaba, right, who were present in the time of Rasul's childhood, right, and little Sahabas who also were present, right. So it's all, it's related, right, and it's passed down, right, whatever she experienced. Alright, so I'm just going to repeat some things that I said last week. I'm just going to read from what Sayyidah Halima herself relates, how she relates her experience with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then we'll go into his life and we'll analyze his life as a child, right, and then the wisdoms, right, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I didn't write it down there, right, but basically we're going to be analyzing the wisdom, right, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made him go through what he went through as a child, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right, so قالت حليمة, Sayyidah Halima, she said, فأخذته ودخلت به على الأصنام فنكس هبل رأسه وخرت الأصنام من أمكانها. Right, so she says that, so I took him, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as a baby. So before this, last week we mentioned that at first, right, Sayyidina Abdul Muttalib, right, the grandfather of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he went out, right, to look for a suitable wet nurse for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in fact, I didn't mention this, right, but it was actually said to him, right, when he was walking out to look for a wet nurse, he heard a voice calling out, right. And we mentioned a bit about it, but there was actually, the voice actually is mentioned in poetry, right. What did the voice say? Right, so the voice actually called out, right, and Abu Muttalib, he heard this voice, right, and then this voice said, Inna binu Aminah al-Amin Muhammadah, right, for surely the son of Aminah, right, the most trustworthy, right, is Muhammad, right, Khair al-Anam wa Safwatul Jabbar, right, he is the best of all human beings, and he is the perfect creation, right, the best creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, al-Jabbar, right. Ma illahu illa Halima murdi'an, right, so there is none for him except Halima as a witness, right, so she was named, right, that she is the very one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to witness Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ni'mal aminatu hi ala al-abrar, right, so she's the best, right, of those who can be trusted, right, over all of those who are righteous, right. La tusallimuhu ila siwaha innahu, right, so the voice said, do not entrust him or do not pass him to anyone besides her, right. She is the one who is most deserving, for surely this is a command of innahu amrun wa hikmun ja'a min jabbar, right, or min qahhar, right. So here it is definitely an instruction, right, and it is a wisdom, right, that has been sent, right, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, al-Qahhar, right, all the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Sayyidina Abu Muttalib, he actually heard this on his way out, right, so we know that he was actually looking, right, for someone who fit the description, and he knew her name would be Halima, and he knew she was going to be from the Bani Sa'd, right, and there are, a few relations on when he met her, right, how pleased he felt, right, when he first saw her, right. So and then last week you mentioned that the story goes that he actually when he met her, she had come down and all the babies were taken, right, there were no babies left, right, because her donkey was so weak and slow, right, so she was last to appear in Mecca, right, and everyone didn't want an orphan boy, and Rasulullah wasn't brought out, actually he was hidden, right, because Abdul Muttalib knew that if anyone were to see Rasulullah, right, they would definitely know he's a very special boy, right, from the first glance of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right. So he was actually hidden, right, in his mother's house, but just Abdul Muttalib went out to just ask, see who would take him, right, to be to witness, right. So eventually, we know the story that Sayyidina Halima walked past him and he asked her, what's your name? And she said Halima, and he smiled, right, and then he said, from which tribe? And she said, from Bani Sa'ad. And he smiled even more, right, because of all the signs. And then he said to her, would you be willing to take care of an orphan? His father has passed away, right? And we know that this milk mothers, right, these wet nurses, they came down only to Mecca to take a baby only for financial gain, right? They were very, very poor desert Arabs, right? It was a year of famine, so all of them actually were hoping, right, to take a baby with them, right, and breastfeed this baby for some financial gain from the family, right, of the child, right? They pay her basically, right? So to take an orphan would defeat the entire reason why they came down in the first place. Right? They weren't doing this for voluntarily. They weren't doing this for fun. Right? It was for money. Right? So it was a very big test of Sayyidatina Halima, and we mentioned that and this is how it is. And Habib Omar, when he tells the story, he says that this is how it is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He hides His blessings in difficulty. And the greatest of blessings, He hid it, in something that was so undesirable. Right? For them to actually, put aside their desires and take on this baby who's an orphan, who can't, they can't pay me. Right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed so much blessing in it. And Habib, when he was the way he speaks is like poetry, right? But the way he was saying it was that, this is not just for this time, it's life as a whole. When Allah wants to give His gifts, right, Allah wraps His gifts in the most ugliest wrapper, right, the ugliest, most repulsive wrapper, right? But you have to come, right? You have to, it's not going to be easy, right? And in fact, from the hadith whereby Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after He created heaven and hell, right, and He said to Jibril, go and see heaven, right? And he went to see heaven, and he came back, and Allah asked him, what do you think? And he said, Ya Rab, no one would hear of it except that he would definitely want to enter it. Right? It's such a beautiful place. Right? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala completely covered or encapsulated, right, heaven with difficulty, right, and hardship. And then He said to Jibril, now go and see it. So heaven is still heaven. Right, it's still, it's still beautiful. It's still heaven, right? But it's just the outer boundary, right, is covered with difficulty, right, and hardship, right? So when he went there and he saw, right, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done, and he came back and he said, Ya Rab, I'm afraid no one will get into it. No one will get there because it's too difficult, right? And then when Allah created hellfire, and He said, go and see the hellfire. And when we went to the hellfire, He came back and He said that, Ya Rab, no one would hear of it except that they would seek all means to not fall into the hellfire. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wrapped the hellfire with beautification and temptings and desires. Right? And then Jibril went to see it, and Jibril came back, Ya Rab, I'm afraid everyone might fall into it. Right? Because of how it's so wrapped. Right? And even in the birth, even in our lives, right? So even in Sayyidatina Halima choosing Rasulullah for her to witness, and we know that she was told first that he is an orphan before she even saw him. Right? So Sayyidina Abdul Muttalib was being fair. Right? Tell her about the facts, right? The dry facts about this boy. We have no money, he's an orphan. Right? There's not going to be any financial support for you, right, in looking after this child. Right? But without her seeing the child, because they know the moment she saw the child, she fall in love. Right? So she was not blinded, right, by the love, in fact. Right? But she was told the hard facts of it. Right? So that's why the wisdom, right, of not falling in love first before you get married. There is a wisdom, yeah. So you see the dry facts, right, of this person, of his religion, of his everything, right? But if you're blinded, right, you're blinded all the way, and then you get into it and you're living with this person and you're like, khalas, he's not what. Like now all the veils are revealed, and then it's become so unbearable. Right, but that's what it is. There's a wisdom. There's a wisdom in that, right? Because you see the facts, right, of this person, right? So she, and we know when she went to see him, right? Of course, at first she went to consult her husband, and then she went to see him, and of course, at first sight, both she and her husband, when they opened up the cloth over his face, he opened his eyes, right, and they were shining, they were glowing, and then he smiled at them, right, and he was shining and glowing from him, and of course the heart, the khalas, he got them, right. So subhanallah, the husband turned to her, she turned to the husband, she's like, he's a blessed child, grab him, right. Then they took him right straight away. So now we're going into what she says, okay. So she says that, so then I took him and I went to the Kaaba and I walked past the idols. And remember, Sayyidatina Halima, she was a monotheist. She was not an idol worshipper, but she was walking past the idols to get to the Kaaba, right? So she said, when I walked past the idols, the idol Hubal, it's one of the idols, Hubal, right? His head was turned around, right? And he was, in a sense, it was turned around, right? And she said the idols began falling on their faces as I walked past them. She relates. Right? I was carrying this baby, the idols. Yeah, as she was walking towards the Kaaba, and she was carrying this baby, the idols fell on their faces. Right, as she walked past, you can just imagine the scene, eh? She almost all the idols are falling off. Right, and then she said, فَجِئْتُ إِلَى الْحَجْرِ الْأَسْوَدِ لِأُقَبِّلَهُ. Right, she said, and I went to the black stone, Hajar Aswad, for me to kiss it. فخرج الحجر من مكانه حتى التصق بوجهه صلى الله عليه وسلم. And when I came near to the black stone, it came out of its position, right, and it stuck itself to the face of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as if it came out to kiss Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فأخبرت بعلي بذلك فقال, and I told my husband about what just happened, and he said, ألم أقل لك إنه مبارك خذيه وانصرفي. Right, so the father, I went to tell my husband about it, and he said, didn't I tell you that this child is blessed? He's blessed. Take him and go. Let's go with him. Don't waste any more time. And then she says, قالت حليمة فمن صرف أحد كمن صرفنا. Right, and no one rushed away. We ran off with the baby because they saw the amount of blessings that was in him. ولا ظفر أحد كما ظفرنا. And no one held on to something so tightly as how we held on to this baby. Right, and we took him with us. قالت فركبت الدابة التي جئت عليها وكانت ضعيفة لا تستطيع المشي. Right, so we know that the first time Sayyidatina Halima picked up Rasulullah in the house of Sayyidatina Amina, right, and she said before this account, she said that it was a year of famine, we were starving, we were hungry, like we were really starved to the bone, right, and she was saying that her own son, right, was crying the whole night long because of starvation, right, he was very hungry. She said that her breast had not even a drop of milk, right, so she couldn't even breastfeed him, right, because she was so skinny. Right, she was so malnourished that she had no milk in her own breast to give her children. Right, so this is why they're really hoping someone will pay them so they can eat something and produce milk. Right, so now, and we mentioned last week also that for her, before she thought of taking the orphan, she herself thought to herself, is this responsible of her to do so? Right, because she has no milk in herself. Her sheep and camels and her sheep has no milk. She has no food to give this child. She can't even feed her own child. Right? So would it be responsible for her? Right? She thought to herself, would it be right? Right? That she takes on another child, right, for her to feed. Right? Which is why she didn't say yes. She said, let me see the child. Just let me see the child. Right? And then and also before she went, when she went to consult her husband said, right, and they will be believers in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Her husband said, right, do this. Like, do this for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do this goodness, and Allah will not disappoint. Right? So it's very strong tawakkal. Very strong belief in the one who provides when he provides. Right? When you see no means whatsoever, nothing, no food, no money, nothing at all. You don't see any way around this. Like, how can this be? Right? And you're told to take more. It means in a sense you're told to give more. And you have nothing, you're down to zero. And you're told to give more. Right? And he said, no, we do it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah will not disappoint. And Allah did not disappoint. Right? Allah handled their affair. Right? And Allah took care of them. Right? So she said that, so that is why we understand that when she carried Rasulullah and placed him to her breast, right, she felt her breast fill up. right, with milk out of nowhere, and she wasn't even eating, right? It just filled up, and he began to suckle and suckle and suckle until he was full. Right, and she tried to make him nurse from the left breast, and he refused, like pointing to the brother. Right, it was for the brother to nurse from. So even at that age, right, there was consideration. You don't drink all the milk. Right, you leave for your brother, right, to drink some of the milk. And she said that he would do that the entire time. He would never take from both breasts. Right, he would always take from one breast and leave the other one for his milk brother, right, to drink from. Right, so we know, so that happened. Right? So when that happened, she knew, subhanAllah, Allah will provide for this child. Do not worry. And for those who are looking after this child. So now she says that we went, right? And she said so we ran off with this child. Right, so when I went to my animal, right, the same animal that I came with, right, the one who was so slow and pathetic, right, that it was so skinny and weak that we were last to arrive in Mecca. Right, so when I went to this animal, she said, لجت عليها وكانت ضعيفة لا تستطيع المشي. Right, he was so weak, he couldn't even walk. فجعلت الدابة تسبق دواب القافلة كلها. Right, and I was so surprised when I got onto this animal of mine. Right, it was a donkey or some animal that she rode on. Right, and I was so surprised that when I got on it, this animal got up, right, and he had so much energy, right, and he overtook all the other animals that had gone ahead because they were last to come. So they had all gone ahead without her. So suddenly, he was overtaking everyone. Right, and he was going very, very fast. Right, and to the point whereby of the entire caravan. To the point, the woman, they said that, حتى كانت النساء يقولن لي, right, and the woman there, they were saying, أمسكي أمسكي أتانك عنا يا حليمة. Right, so they said that, oh Halima, wait up for us. Right, hold your animal. And they said that, is this animal the same animal that you came on? And she said, yes, it's the same monkey that I came on. But he's like, mashallah, he's so energized now. Right, and he's so much so fast. Right, he overtook everyone. And they were surprised. It would look like a different animal altogether, right, that he was on. So it's just showing that wherever Rasulullah is, the barakah, the blessing of Rasulullah, right, is really overflowing, right, wherever he is. Right, and miracles of the prophets, they begin from the time that they are born. Right, it manifests. Right, so people around them, they know that this boy, there's something about this boy. And in fact, her entire clan, her entire tribe, they knew about the boy. Everybody knew about this boy, the special boy, right? Because whenever anyone, she does relate, whenever anyone would fall sick amongst her people, they would come to Rasulullah SAW as a baby, right? And they would take his hand, and place on the part that is sick, right? And he will be cured immediately. Right, so everyone knew about the magic boy, right? The mashallah, they don't call it magic, but they call it the barakah boy. Right, he's full of barakah, he's full of blessing. Right, you just take him and he he cures everything. Right, so she took so basically she went up, right, and she says, right, وَكُنْتُ لَا أَمُرُّ عَلَى شَجَرٍ وَلَا مَدَرٍ إِلَّا وَيَقُولُ السَّلَامُ عَلَيْكَ يَا خَيْرَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ السَّلَامُ عَلَيْكَ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. Right, so she said that I did not pass by any tree, nor any rock, except that I heard it say, right, peace be upon you, O best of messenger, peace be upon you, O prophet of Allah. Right, so she heard it with her own ears, right, from the trees and from the stones, right, saying it to her. وَكُنَّا لَا نَنْزِلُ تَحْتَ شَجَرَةٍ يَابِسَةٍ إِلَّا خَضَرَّتْ وأثمرت لوقتها ببركته صلى الله عليه وسلم. Right, and she said, and we did not stop, under a dry tree, completely dead dry tree, except that the moment we sat there, the entire tree became green and fruitful. The whole thing became alive, green and fruitful. So every tree that we sat under, it just came to life. Right, she said, by the blessing of this boy that I was carrying. Right, so she's, and that's the beginning of her life with him, and she would observe over and over and over and over again so many things from this beautiful little boy. Right, so she says, فَسِرْنَا حَتَّى أَتَيْنَا مَنَازِلَنَا وَعِنْدَنَا Shuwayhat, right? So she says that, and we travel, right? We travel and we travel and we travel. And Habib Omar, he mentioned a story, an instance, whereby on her way to her town, right, which is in Taif, right, on her way to her town, they passed by a souk, right, which is like a marketplace, right? And in this marketplace, right, there was actually a soothsayer there, right? So when they passed by the soothsayer looked at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right, and he pointed at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he shouted out at the top of his voice. He said, "Kill that little baby! Kill him now, for he will take over all of you." Right, so he's been told by his jinn right, about this affair. Right, so he pointed at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he shouted very loudly, "Kill that little baby right now! He's going to take all over all of you. He's going to be a king over you." Right, so as Sayyidatina Halimah, she got scared. Right, she ran into the crowd and she managed to get herself out. Right, and it wasn't the first time that happened to her. Right, a second time also when she passed by another souk later on in Rasulullah's life when she was carrying him. Right, and there was another soothsayer, right, who also saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he shouts out, right, "Kill that boy, kill that boy." And she did meet a Jew, right, who also said, "Kill this boy." Right? No, there was the story wasn't that. The story was that she met two Jews that came to her, right, and they saw all the signs of prophethood in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a little baby, right? And they asked her, and now she's experienced, she knows people are trying to kill this baby, right? So they asked her, right, is this boy an orphan, right? And she says, "No, I'm his mother," and and she pointed to her husband, and that's his father. Of course, she meant in witnessing, right? But she said, just say that way, and I'm the mother, and there's the father, right? So then the Jews said, "Okay, can't be him. He needs to be. He should be born an orphan, right?" So because they knew the signs, right? So they were like, "Can't be him. He had every sign except that he's not an orphan, so it can't be him." So they left him, right? And otherwise, if they had known that he was really an orphan, and his real father had passed away, they would have killed him. And they were all out, right, to kill the last prophet. Right, because of whatever they had, like this is in their heart, right? So she knew, right? Sayyidatina Halimah, right? She met these people, which is why it freaked her out, right? When her son ran, and the story of his chest being split, we will go into it today, inshallah. When her son ran back and said that my Qurayshi brother, right? 2 men came, right? And some nations 3 men came, right? And they split his chest, and I think he's dead, right? So she panicked because she knows it was definitely possible. Right, there were people who were out to kill him. Right, so she freaked out, she panicked because it's not her child. Right, it's someone else's child. Right, so she ran out immediately. And we're going to the story when we get there. Alright, so Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Alright, so she says that so we reached our home, right, and we had this little, and she said Shuwayhat from the word Shah. Shah is basically a sheep. So Shuwayhat, right, it means like so pathetically small, skinny sheep that we used to have. They were very small and they were very skinny. They were starved because of the state of the land for that year. Right? So she described them as really pathetic beings, not hardly a sheep. Right? They are very small. Right? So Shuwayhat, this is the way the Arabic is. Ijafun, di'afun. They were so dry and weak. They were dry right, and weak. So she says, فأخذت يد محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ووضعتها عليهن. So I went to this sheep, and she just reached home, and she knows about this boy, right, and his barakah. She said, I took his hand, right, and I went to my sheep, right, and then I placed his hand on my sheep. فَضَرَرْنَا لِوَقْتِهِنَّ. And وَمُنْذُ أَخَذْنَاهُ لَمْ يَكُنْ لَنَا مِصْبَحٌ فِي اللَّيَالِ الْمُظْلِمَةِ إِلَّا نُورُ وَجْهِهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ. Right, and she says, when I took his hand to the sheep, right, and I placed his hand on the sheep, right, they began to fill up, like at that moment itself. I saw them filling up. Right, they just filled up. Right, so that moment itself, right, subhanallah. And she said that we used to not have light in the night. Because we live in the deserts, right? So they only depend on the moonlight, right? So, but from the time when Rasulullah came into our house, we always had light at night from the light that was emanating from his face, right? So it was a physical light, right? That they could see. Sayyidah Aisha relates that she was once sewing, right, and she dropped her pin, right, and then some came into the room and she found her pin, and it was at night, right? So he, subhanallah, he had a physical light emanating from his face, and the Sahabas all are witness to that. They know about it. Right? They know he walks around like a lamp. Right? He's so bright in himself, but it's beautiful. Like, it's not like weird or anything. Right? It's a beautiful sight that we can't imagine until we see him, and we see him in our, inshallah, in our dreams and in our awakened state. Inshallah. So and then she says that Sayyidina Muhammad, قالت حليمة, and Sayyidina Halima said, وكنت إذا أعطيته ثدي الأيمن شرب وإذا حولته لثدي الأيسر أبى لأن الله تبارك وتعالى ألهمه العدل حتى في الرضاعة. Right, and she relates, and whenever I would give him my right breast, right, he would drink from it, and whenever I tried to make him drink from my left breast, he would refuse, because she says, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught him about fairness, right, even in nursing, even as a baby he knew about fairness, right? So alima anna lahu sharikan fanasafahu adalan minhu sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He knew, it's as if he knew he had someone to share with, like sharikan, someone to share with. So he halved. You take one and I take one, and we don't take. I won't take your share and you don't take my share, right? And this is no. And Sayyidina Halima, one thing, and we'll mention this in the second point, right, about wet nursing, right? Because Sayyidina Halima, when you look at all her hadith, right, they are not like the Sahaba hadith. She has a very unique way of speaking. She's very eloquent, right? She uses very sometimes difficult words in the way she describes things, right? So she has hadith related from her, right? And the wording and the Arabic and the sentence structure and how she actually relates what she saw, right, is so eloquent. Right, and there's a hadith later on by Sayyidina Abu Bakr came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he said to Rasulullah, Ya Rasulullah, I've never seen somebody as eloquent as you. Right, he's not a sha'ir. He did not ever come up with poetry, right? But his speech was eloquent. Right, he was someone of very high and very refined speech. Right? At the same time, he could speak the dialect of all the different types of Arabs that came to him. So it was a miracle in himself that anyone that came to him, right, from any part of the Arabian Peninsula, he knew the dialect. Right? He knew the way they spoke. Right? So, and he could make them feel comfortable, right, by speaking the way they spoke. But at the same time, he had the highest form of Arabic amongst the Arabs. Right? No Arab, right, even in his time, I could compare to the way he spoke, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when Sayyidina Abu Bakr commented, Ya Rasulullah, I've never met anyone, as eloquent as you. And he said, and Rasulullah responded, and he said, and how is that not so? Because I'm from the Quraysh, right? And the Quraysh are known, right, for their good speech. And I was brought up with the Bani Sa'd, and the Bani Sa'd were known for their refined speech, right? So that's where I got it from. Right? And that's why, we mentioned last week, the first few years of a child's life, that is when they pick up the speech. Right? How do they speak? Do they speak well? The grammar they pick up. Right? That those first few years, right, of their life is crucial. Right? So if you're going to continue speaking to them, in like baby language, in like broken English, in broken sentences, right, then they're just going to grow up in their broken sentences. Right, but if you focus on using better language, you will hear them being developing better language, because children don't study grammar, right? They don't study grammar, they just hear it, right, and then they learn it. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was brought up, right, by someone of the highest language, right? So and he took it from her, right? So waqalat Halima, that's what Halima, right? So and she went on to say, right? She went on to say. قالت حليمة وانقطع الغيث عنا سنة كاملة من السنين فأخذناه وخرجنا به إلى الصخراء وقلنا اللهم بحرمة هذا المولود عليك إلا ما سقيتنا الغيث يا ربنا يا معبود. قالت فإذا السماء قد غيمت وسكبت ماء كأفواه القرب. MashaAllah, her language. So she says that, while he was living with us in his childhood, while he was with us in his youth, there was a year, of the 2 years that he was us. One of the years there was no rain for that year, right? So we took him. Right, I took him in my arms, and the entire community went with us. We went out to the plains, right, into the desert, right, and we raised our hands and we said, "Oh Allah," right. And so they were believers, they were monotheists, right? They were monotheists, right? So he said, "Oh Allah, right, by the sanctity, right, of this child, right, with you, right, by the sanctity of the child with you, right, rain on us, right, so much rain, right, to help us out of our condition," right? Just from the language that she's using, right? "Oh our Lord, oh the one who is worshipped," right? And she says that, and at that point, that moment in time, we saw clouds gathering. Right? There was no clouds. Right? It was a clear sky, and that moment in time, clouds began to gather and rain began to fall. Right? So the people, it was very clear. Right? The people, they knew that the dua made by this special child, right, was answered by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right, so she says, وَقَالَتْ Halima. Right? So she has many hadiths that she actually relates, right, about Rasulullah's time with her. وَقَالَتْ Halima, and Sayyidah Halima, she said, فَمَا زَالَ عِنْدِي حَتَّى يَسَّرَ اللَّهُ عَلَيَّ الْخَيَرَاتِ وَبَرَكَاتِ وَسَعَدَاتِ ببركته صلى الله عليه وسلم ثم إنه خرج يوما مع أخيه ضمره يرعيان غنما لنا حول بيوتنا. Right, so before we go into the story, right, so here, right, in the house of Sayyidah Halima, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right, so he was one thing, said not just he, right, was him himself and his touch was barakah, but everywhere around him became a place of Sayyidah Halima's family. Right, it benefited from the blessings of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So even to the point whereby her own sheep, right, began to grow fat. Right, and they would go out into the pastures, and there's no pasture, she just said. Right, so it's so dry. Right, so they'll go into the mountains, right, and it's all rock. There's no grass anywhere. It's so dry. There was no rain for a long time. Right, so it was all, this was before. Right, there was all rock, and there was no rain. And then, but they would come back full with milk, right, and they would be getting fatter and fatter, her sheep. So the people of her town were like, they told their shepherds, like, go follow where the sheep of Halima are going. Right, they're finding some grass somewhere. Right, so follow them, right, so you can find the grass. Right, so they will follow the sheep of Sayyidah Halima, right, and they will relate that they will see the sheep, right, at all times, their heads bent down on the ground as if they're eating, but there's nothing there. Right, it's just rock. That's all it is. But they would. So the shepherds are like, they're so confused. So they said the sheep, they're all like that. Right, their heads are all down and they're all chewing on. Can't see what's there. Right, there's nothing there. It's all rock. Right, but they're chewing, and when they lift their heads, they actually see greenery in the mouths. Right, so the shepherds are like, but our sheep find nothing. Her sheep seem to find all this invisible grass. Right, but subhanAllah, it is the barakah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They relate. Like, they actually saw it and they relate. And they saw in the mouth of the sheep there was grass, but there's no grass on the floor. Where are they getting the grass from? Right, so they will relate these kind of things. And the people of the town, as mentioned before, they knew of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's his barakah, his blessing in the house of Sayyidah Halima, and they would use him. Right, they would actually go to her house, right, and use his hand, right, for them to be cured whenever they needed a cure. Right, so now at the end of 2 years, so Sayyidah Halima, she breastfed Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam for 2 years. Right, and we know that the growth of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not like any human being. Right, she relates, right, that by like less than the first month, he began walking. Right, so we were like 1 year old not walking. Yeah, less than a month, he began walking, talking. Right, and not talking like Baba, Mama, whatsoever. Though he's in full sentences. She said the first thing she heard from him, because we know that when he was born, right, he went into sajda. Right? Not all babies can do sajda. They're all like on their back. Right? They can't, go into they can't even sit up. Their necks are also weak. Right? But when he was born, he went straight into sajda, and then he pointed to the sky. Right? This is when he was born. His mother saw. Right? And he said, Allahu Akbar kabira, walhamdulillahi kathira, wa subhanallahi bukratan wa asila. Right? So he said that. And that was it. He didn't say anything else after that. So he kept quiet as what other babies do. They don't talk. Right? And then Sayyidah Halima says that when she was with her in his 8th month, right, he began to speak. And the first thing he said was, Allahu Akbar kabira, walhamdulillahi kathira, wa subhanallahi bukratan wa asila. Right? So subhanallah, right? So she said that was the first thing that came out of his mouth. And from then on, he was speaking full sentences at the age of 8 months. At the age of 8 months, he was speaking full sentences. He was able to walk around. He was strong, she said. Like he had a strong body. Right? So even though he was 2 years old, by the time she finished breastfeeding him, right, he could be trusted, right, and he could hold responsibility. 2-year-old, our 2-year-old, jangan harap, right, to give them anything. Right, but this is of Allah's blessing on His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And he was never, in a state whereby he was not aware. He was always aware, right, of what is going on around him, and we know this from a hadith, right, by Sayyidina Abbas, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, who is the uncle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who once came up to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he said, "Ya Rasulullah, do you know what made me believe in you?" Right? And he said, "No, my uncle, tell me. Right, what made you believe in me?" Then he said that you were a baby, right? And I came into your presence, right? And I saw you, pointing in the sky, right? And you were laughing. You were laughing to yourself, right? You were chuckling to yourself. And when I looked up to see what you were pointing at, right, it was the moon. Right? And when you pointed to the right, the moon would move right. And when you pointed to the left, the moon will move left. Right? And I saw that basically the uncle came and he saw this happening one night. Right? You were like, what is going on? Right? So subhanallah. So and Sayyidina Abbas said, I knew at that point you were a very special baby. Right? Because of course no one points to the moon and plays with the moon, right? Right? And then somebody responded. And this is in his adulthood. He responded, he said that, "Oh yes, my uncle, I remember that occasion." He actually remembers that occasion. And he says that, do you know what I was doing? He said that, he said that the moon actually came to me, right? And it was playing with me to distract me from crying. Right? So I was playing with the moon right, as a distraction from crying. Right? So these are things that shows, that he was aware. He knew what was going on around him. Right? He was not like other human beings. Right? He was very, very special from the beginning. I don't know. It wasn't mentioned, but they say he was a baby in a cradle. Yeah. They say Allahu Alam. Maybe it could be before that, before he actually was given to Sayyidah Halima, Allahu Alam. Right? But the uncle basically saw, right, what he was doing with the moon.
How old was Sayyid when he went with Halima? How old was
he? He was. It also is not mentioned, like how old he was exactly, right? But it was mentioned that his mother did feed him for about a month, about that, right? So maybe he was a few months old, right? Because the people of Ta'if only came down once a year. Ta'if, yeah.
You mean the town that
yeah, same town, right? Same area. If I'm not wrong, in the same area where Sayyidah Halima came from. If I'm not wrong, because later on in his life, right, they would fight. The people of Ta'if would come out and they would fight the Muslims, right? And then of the captives was Rasulullah's own sister in witnessing, right? And she became Muslim also. Right? It was mentioned that she became Muslim, Shaima. Right? So he actually met his sister, right, after many years of not meeting her. Right? So that was after the war, lah. Right? They actually fought with the people with the Muslims. Yeah, so yeah, the same place where they stoned him. But Sayyidah Halima it was said that she passed away before he received revelation. Right? Because you can imagine, and he received revelation when he was 40. Right? So she looked after him as a baby. So probably she passed away, before that. Allahu Alam. Right? So so it's just mentioned lah. Right? And the people of the witnesses, they come down only once a year. Right? So it's not like she just gave birth and they came the next day. Right, so there was some time, right, and then they came. Right, so he was a bit of an age right there. All right, so and then she said, so basically this is what happened in the first 2 years, right? The blessings that was in him, everyone knew about it. Her own animals, right, became fat, and she was so amazed. And both her and her husband, they both knew about the greatness of this child that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala has bestowed upon them. And of course, they were not upset at all that they're not being paid because they're getting way more than what they expected and what they bargained for. Right. So after 2 years, right, as promised by all, as the way it is, right, they would bring the child back to the parents, right, or to the mother in this case. Right, so she did not want to let go of this child. Right, he was bringing too many blessings to the household. Right, so she reluctantly went back to Mecca, right, with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right, to look for his mother. Right, so when he went back to Mecca, right, to look for his, right, to look for his mother, right, she found his mother, right, and she said to the mother, you know what, there's this sickness going around in Mecca, it's being spread around. It's not healthy for the boy to live here, right? And it's, so she was saying lah, and then first the mother said, no, let him stay with me. Then she said, no, it's not. You just leave him with me for a while more until this disease goes away. Until things are clear in Mecca. Then I'll send him back. Because I think it's not safe for him to be here. She was basically giving reasons like why she should bring him back, right, and not give him to the mother. And so eventually the mother actually saw right, what she was doing, what she wanted, and the mother gave permission, right, for her to keep Rasulullah a while longer. Right, so she happily she took Rasulullah back with her up to the mountains. Right, So here, right, so now she brought Rasulullah back up to the mountains. Right, now he's already been weaned. Right, he was only breastfed for 2 years. Right, and there is a very great wisdom, right, in breastfeeding for 2 years. So even our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right, his breastfeeding was only 2 years. Right, it was no longer than that. Right, and the ulama do comment on the spiritual benefits, right, of if you're able to do 2 years, do 2 years. And do not do more than that. Right, to stop after 2 years, right? Because there is spiritual damaging effects, right? If you were to prolong it after 2 years, and if prolonging it was good, then Rasulullah will be the first one to go through that, right? But he did not, right? He stopped after 2 years specifically, right? So, right? So he grew exceptionally quick, right? So basically, so what happened was that he was not someone who liked to play with the children, right? He was not, of childish nature, right? But he liked seclusion. He liked to be by himself, right? So now, basically, what he's doing in the house of Sayyidatina Halimah is he's just hanging out there, right? Because he's not being, nursed anymore, right? He's just a child who's now 2 years old, 2 plus, right? He's not really doing anything there, right? So he would just walk around, and then he would just sit outside, right? So he won't really do anything. Right, and Sayyidatina Halimah, she always ensured that he stayed near the house because she was very, very afraid, right, that any of the Jews that she met a few more on her way back. Right, when she went down to Sayyidatina Aminah, on her way back, she met a few more Ahlul Bayt, right, who actually asked her about this child. Right, and she at this point she knows already, right. So yeah, Ahlul Kitab, right, who asked her about this child. Right, and she already knew what they wanted, right, and she would always weave her way out. Right, and escape from them, right, because she knew they were out to kill Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right, so Rasulullah actually he noticed he had an older sister named Shaima, right, sister in sense in witnessing, right, and he noticed that his older sister, right, who was always helping Sayyidatina Halimah, he noticed that she would disappear, right, every morning, right, he can't find her every morning. So he asked Sayyidatina Halimah, where does she go every day? Right, and this is like a 2-year-old asking. Right, so he asked, at this point in time, you must know he's not a normal 2-year-old. Right, so he's asking her where does his older sister go every day. Right, and Sayyidatina Halimah said that, she goes to shepherd the sheep, right, to bring the sheep out, into the pastures and to eat and to bring back. And then he volunteered himself and he said that, let me do it. I'm not doing anything. I'm not going out to play, right? So might as well make use of me, maybe do something, right? So he began to shepherd the sheep with his sister. And he went to occupy himself lah. Right, and that was the way Rasulullah was. Right, so he wasn't somebody who, he enjoyed wasting time. No, he was not someone of folly, of play. No, right. He did mix with the people. Right, he did enjoy their company. Right, but he was not someone who, he was always in deep thought of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. Right, so the story goes that there was one day whereby he was actually with his brother, right? The same brother in the same year, but they were witnessing together. Right, that brother, right? He was with that brother behind the house of Saydatina Halimah. Right, because Saydatina Halimah still, told him, even if you go and shepherd the sheep, you're not allowed to go so far. You must stay around here. Right, you can't go so far. Right, so he was behind the house with his brother, right? And that was when 3 men came up to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right, they had a bucket of ice in there with them, and they said they had like containers of gold, right, made from gold that they brought with them. Right, so the brother, right, got afraid, right, and he ran, but he ran up the mountain to see what was going on. Right, so they saw these 3 men, right, take Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or some say it was 2 men, take Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right, and they laid him down. Right, and he actually just, he gave in. He did not fight back. There was no struggle, nothing. Right, but he allowed them to come to him, right, lay him down, right, and then they split open his chest. Right, so they cut his chest from the neck down to the belly button. They cut open. Right, so, and the brother at this point, he panicked. Right, the brother panicked, right, and he ran back home. Right, and he, screamed for his parents, and he was like, my Qurayshi brother. Right, a few men came, right, and they took him and they cut open his chest. I'm sure he's dead right now. I'm sure he's dead. Right, so Sayyidatina Halimah, she panicked, right, and she ran out, right, to look for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right, so here she relates, right, this incident. Right, so she says that. What's Sayyidina Muhammad? Alright, so she says that. So there was once, right, that he went out with his brother, Damra, right, yara'ayan ghanaman, right, and they were looking after the sheep. Lana hawla buyutina, right, and they were around our house. فبينما أنا كذلك إذ بإبني ضمرة يعدو. Right, so and I was in the house and I was doing my own work. Right, when my son Damra, right, he came back, right, to the house. Right, وقد علاه سفرة, right, and he looked pale. Right, he actually had gone pale because of what he saw. Right, and he was panicking. وهو ينادي يا أماه يا أماه يا أماه, oh my mother. Right, my أخي القريش يا Muhammad, أخي القريش, my brother the Qurayshi, right, Muhammad. Right, فما أظنك تجدينه إلا مقتولا. Right, I don't think you will find him in any state except that he has been killed. Right, so that is how they speak. Right, so that he went back and he said, you are going to find him killed. Right, I saw him. He was murdered out there. Right, so she says that فَعَاذَهُ اللَّهُ مِنْ ذَلِكَ. And I scolded him for saying that. Right, so Halimah said, I scolded him for saying that Muhammad is dead. Right, don't say that. Na'udhu billah. Right, but no, I went out with him. قالت حليمة فأسرعنا فإذا هو شاخص ببصره إلى السماء. Right, so she said, so we ran out to find him, right, to look for him, and we found him by himself, and he was looking up at the sky. Right, he looked completely fine. Right, so we went to him, and she said, and I took him and I hugged him, right, to myself, right, and he looked at me, right, and he began to smile and he began to laugh. Right, so I was, it was very confusing, right, because one child comes and tells you this guy that the other son is being killed, and you come out and you find him, sitting by himself, looking up at the sky, right, and when you try and hug him, like, he smiles at you, and he's normal joyous self, right? So you say, فَلَمَّا رَآنِي تَبَسَّمَ ضَاحِكًا, right? He was smiling and laughing. Right? فَضَمَمْتُهُ إِلَى صَدْرِي وَقَبَّلْتُ بَيْنَ عَيْنَيْهِ. Right? So I hugged him, right, very tight, and I kissed him between his eyes. فَقُلْتُ لَهُ, and I said to him, حبيبي فدتك نفسي ما الذي أصابك يا بني. Right? So she says, oh my beloved, right, may my life be sacrificed for you. right? What has happened to you, oh my little child? Right, so she's worried what's going on, because it's not like the other son is going to lie about this. It's probably not a lie. Something did happen, right? And he asked him what happened. فَقَالَ لَهَا, right? And he said to her, جَاءَنِي ثَلَاثَةٌ, right? It came to me 3 people, نفر. فأخبرها أنهم شقوا صدري وأخرجوا قلبي وغسلوه وردوه إلى مكانه وتأمى صدري بقدرة الله سبحانه وتعالى من غير ألم. Right, so and he informed her, right, that these three people came, right, and I'll go into the details of the story. These 3 people came, right, and they cut open his heart. Right, and this incident of the heart, of the chest, not cut open the heart, but cut open the chest. Right, so this incident of the cutting of the chest, it happened more than once in the lifetime of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right, scholars have mentioned that it happened about 4 times. I'll check again, 4 or 5. Maybe it's 4 times if I'm not wrong. Right, it happened to him in his childhood. It happened to him in his teenagehood, in his youth. It happened to him before the wahyu. Right, when he got the revelation. It happened to him before Isra wal Mi'raj. Right, so 4 times in his life, this splitting of the chest actually happened to him. So it was not going to be the last time this was going to happen to him. And each time, right, the chest, the heart is being prepared, right, for something that he needs to be able to carry. Right, so the first time when it happened to him, right, so basically the 3 men were angels lah. Right, and when they cut open his chest, he did not bleed, nor did he feel any form of pain. Right, and I had to, whenever I tell kids the story, right, I must always assure them it was not painful, right? There was no blood, right? But they cut open because they're angels, right? So they use their wings, right? So they use light, right, to cut open the chest of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And he was awake the entire time. He could see what they were doing, right? Supposedly he was on anesthesia or anything like that, right? But he was completely aware of what was going on, right? So they took out his chest, right? And Habib Omar mentions here that, when they took out his chest, right, they took out a black spot that was in his heart, right? That every human being has, like a small spot. They took it, they threw it away, right? And they took something else and they threw it away. And Habib Omar said that something that they took from his heart, right, was a portion of mercy in his heart, right, that would have been for Iblis. So that was removed from his heart, right, because he had mercy for all, right? But to prevent him from having mercy on Iblis, right, that part was taken, right, away from him, right? So no mercy for Iblis. Right? Iblis is, he's condemned, he's doomed, right? So there's no mercy for Iblis. So otherwise, he might in the seat for Iblis. Like, you don't want that to happen, right? Or Allah Alam, you want that to happen about Iblis, right? But basically, that was Habib Omar. For me, these things, it's best to always take it from a scholar, right? Because there's so much in Sirah. Right? So whatever, Habib said, khalas, it is proven. Right, so and then they placed his heart back, right, in its place, right, and in one of the gold containers, it was sakina. There was a tranquility that they poured into him, right. In the other container, there was wisdom that they poured into him, right. So they just emptied it into his chest, right, and then they sealed it up, and there was no scar, nothing lah, right. So basically, it was sealed up, right, and then they went off, right, and then Sayyidatina Halima came and she found him in that state. Right, so he was, he was not traumatized or anything, right, in any way, right, but he was actually perfectly fine. There's a hadith I want to relate, right, before we continue, right. There's a hadith. Now, what time is it? Okay, 9:07. All right. So there is a hadith whereby. Alright, whereby the Sahaba said to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now this happened later on, right, in Medina. Right, so the Sahaba said, Ya Rasulullah, akhbirna an nafsik. Right, Ya Rasulullah, tell us about yourself. So they want to get to know Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Because most of them actually met Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam after he got the first wahyu, right? After his entire prophethood had commenced and he was spreading the message. So he was well into his 40s and 50s before the Sahabas actually met him. So most of them, right, did not really grow up with him, right? Nor did they know his childhood and his teenagehood and his youth, right? So very few, in fact, knew of Rasulullah as he was growing up, right? So they asked him, Ya Rasulullah, tell us about yourself. We want to know about you, right? What about you? Right? So he said, Qala Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Naam, right? Sure, right? Listen up. Ana da'watu Abi Ibrahim. Right? I am the dua of my father Ibrahim. Right? Wa bushra akhi Isa. And I am the good news of my brother Isa, Nabi Isa alayhi salam. Wa ra'at ummi hina hamalat bi. And my mother, she saw, right, while she was pregnant with me, right, أنه خرج منها نور أضاء لها قصور الشام. Right, so she said that my mother, when she was pregnant with me, right, she saw, when she gave birth, right, she saw light coming out of her, right, that lit up for her the castles of Syria. Right, so we know all these stories, where they're coming from, Like, so Rasulullah himself is relating, right, about his birth. Right, so قصور الشام واسترضعت في بني سعد, right, bin Bakr. Right, and he says that, and I was witnessed, right, and I was brought up by Bani Sa'ad, by the Sa'adiyun, right, from Halimahtussa'diyah, right, from that family. And then he relates, فَبَيْنَمَا أَنَا مَا أَخِي لِي خَلْفَ بُيُوتِنَا, right, and while I was with my brother, right, behind our house, تَرَعَى بَهِيمًا لَنَا, right, and you were looking after animals that belong to us, إِذْ أَتَانِي, right, when it came to us, rajulan, right, two men, right. So there differences of opinion, right, 2 men or 3 men, right. But basically there were a few men that came. Right, rajulan, alayhima thiyabu bayl, right. They had very white clothes. Bitastin min dhahab, right. So they had containers with them, right, of gold. Right, and one container was filled with snow, right, snow or ice. Right, so subhanAllah, like they were said that they had also Zamzam with them, right, where they placed the heart in Zamzam and they washed it with Zamzam, right, and then they insert into the heart wisdom and tranquility. Right, ثم أخذاني فشقا بطني واستخرج قلبي. Right, so they took me and laid me down, right, and they split open my chest and they took out my heart. فشقاه فاستخرج منه علقة سوداء, right, and they split open the heart. So they split open the chest first, took out the heart, and they split open the heart, and they took out from it, there was a black clot. Right, they took out from it, and they threw it, فترحها, right, and they threw it away. ثم غسل قلبي, and they began to wash my heart. وبطني, and they washed my insides, right, my stomach, my insides. بذلك الثلج حتى anqayahu, and they washed it with the snow and the zamzam, right, until it was completely cleaned, right. And ثم قال أحدهما لصاحبه, right, and he heard that these two people that came to him, or these angels that came to him, they began to converse between each other, right, in front of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he heard one of them say, "Zinhu bi ashrati min ummati," right, weigh him with 10 of the people of his nation, right. So and he was weighed with 10 of the people of his nation, and he said that, and I outweighed them. Then he said, "Zinhu bi mi'ah," right, weigh him with 100. So this is not something that's physical, right, but it's something that is majani, right. So basically something that is non-physical, right, but it was an image that he was shown, right. So weigh him with 100, right, of his own ummah, right, and he rajahahu, right, and he outweighed them, right, and then it was said, so weigh him with 1,000 of his ummah, right, next to 1,000 of his ummah, weigh him, right, and when they weigh him next to 1,000, he outweighed them, right, and then eventually one of them said to the other one, leave him, for by Allah, right, if you weigh him against all of humanity, right, he would outweigh them. Right, so this is one of the narrations, right, that is narrated about this occasion of the splitting of the chest. All right. So now Sayyidah Halima, right, going back to her, right, what's going on with her? So she comes down, right, and she sees his boy, she hugs him, right. He tells her about the story, and he's never known to lie, right. Of course, and her own son, relates the same thing, right. So this definitely happened to him, right? And so now she went to her husband, right? So don't think that this issue is something that is small. Right? It's a major issue if a boy who's under your care comes to you and says, somebody split open my chest and then pull back my heart, and then now he has like sealed it up. Right? You just as much as he's a very blessed boy, right? But these things is beyond your understanding. Right? So she went to her husband and she said, this is what the boy said. Right? So and we what's going on, kan? Right? So this is what the boy said. So the husband said, okay, you know what? Take him, we'll bring him to a kahin. Right? They actually went to a soothsayer, right, to figure out what's going on, because they know it's something that is not within this realm. Right? It must be something supernatural that happened to him. They were actually afraid, right, that it was something of the jinn, that something of the other realm had overtaken him, or they had done something to him, because it does sound like someone sent something to you and cut on your chest, and like it could be that someone sent black magic. It could be it could be something evil. And then also the scholars say the whole time Rasulullah SAW, right, was being given messages from the angels. Right, there were he himself, when he first got the message in the cave, he thought he was being possessed. Right, there's two ways when it comes to the supernatural. Right, either angel or devil. Right, it's one of them, right, who's bothering you. Right, so Saydatina Halimah, at this point, when you hear this story, you don't think angel straight away. You think shaitan. Right, came and split his chest. So it's not something that we think it's so obvious, the angels. It's not obvious. Right, angels don't come to people. Right, very rarely they actually come to people. The devils do. Right, and that one is more common, that they actually come to people. Right, so she actually thought it was the devils, right, that came and disturbed and bothered Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right, and one of the signs there, and the ulama have mentioned, right, about disturbances from the good realm, right, the angels, and disturbances from the evil realm, right, which is the devils, right. They say that when the angel comes to you, I mean, it won't come to us lah. First clear cut lah. Anybody comes to you, probably devil. Right? I don't think anybody here getting ilham or getting like some wahyu going on. Right? So okay, for us, clear cut. Okay, we're not prophets. Okay, for us, anybody come to you at night, right? Say now, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, very at the kursi and run away. Right? So, but I mean, it could be an awliya, it could be a wali, come to you at night. Allahu alam. Right, so but it is mentioned that when the devil comes, right, and they give you a spiritual experience, and we know that the awliya of the past, right, they, like the shaitan, Iblis himself, he pretends to be Allah, right, and he calls it that Sayyidina Abdul Qadir Jalani is mentioned in his story, right, but he was walking once, and Iblis pretended to be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right, so Iblis can even pretend to be Allah, right? But he can't pretend to be Rasulullah SAW. That is not allowed of him, right? So he pretended to be a voice from above, and he called down to Sayyidina Abu Qadir Jalani, right? And he said that, oh, Abdul Qadir Jalani, you are the best of my servants, right? And I'm so pleased with you, and I'm so proud of you, and you don't have to pray after this day. Right? So it is Iblis punya plan lah. Right? So Syekh Abdul Qadir Jalani, he stooped down, he took a piece of rock and he threw it at Iblis and get lost, right? Ya adu Allah, right? Slave, so enemy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then Iblis didn't stop there. He said, Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jalani, mashallah, I got so many of the awliya of Allah subhanahu of Allah, with this trick. I didn't get you knew it. And then Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jalani took another piece of rock and threw it at him and then to get lost. Right, because you're trying to make me feel proud of myself. I'm a dust at the feet of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What am I? Right, so Iblis, he was just trying to get Shaykh Abdul Qadir. Even after that, he tried to make him feel proud. Right, because by flattery, that everyone else was tricked by this trick, and it was a trick that worked with a lot of awliya. Right, he said, but you saw right through it. So he saw right through that. Right? So get lost. I am just a dust at the feet of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'm nothing, right, compared to him. Right. So anyway, they say that if it's a negative energy or negative spirit, right, basically jinn lah, that's coming to bother you, right, when they when they leave your presence, right, you feel a very strong constriction inside. Right? It's very heavy and very strong constriction. It is a depressing thing. But when the angel comes, right, but not that we will experience this lah, right, but when the angel comes, right, and it bothers you, right, and when they leave, right, there will be an expansion. And that was observed in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So for them to know, if whenever they see him having an experience, to know if really it was a jinn or an angel, right, could be either one, right, that came to him, right, they will see that the effects thereafter was an expansion. Right, it was an opening of the chest, an expansion, and he became higher than what he was, higher and higher. Right, so it shows a reason why we see it for his childhood. Right, when the angels came, right, if he was like a jinn or what, he would be like crouched and he would be, very bothered. Right, but he was looking up and he was looking at the sky, and he was smiling to his mother. Right, and he was like perfectly, there was an expansion that happened with him. Right, so and also with the cave, also when he ran down to his wife, Sayyidah Khadijah, right, and he was worried that he was being bothered by a jinn in the cave, which is so likely, and you see in the cave, probably a jinn might come by and bother you, especially for one of us, right? And for him, so he was afraid because the man appeared out of nowhere, came to him, hugged him, said "Iqra," like it's so subhanallah, right? It was shocking. Right, so he ran down, and he was afraid, right? And he was afraid that he was being bothered. He was being possessed by a jinn. And Sayyidah Khadijah, right, in the wisdom that she has, right, she first and foremost she mentioned the characteristics of Rasulullah that that showed that no, it's impossible. We'll go into the story, right? It's impossible that Allah will leave you, right, for the jinn to bother you, because you are the one who gives food to the poor. You are the one who maintains ties of kinship. Right? You are the one who helps those who are in need. Right? So by your goodness, you will not be left by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right, and she further proved it, right, by asking him, whenever the being comes, near you, tell me, right, and I have like a plan lah, a plan to ensure if this is a shaitan or an angel, right. So once he was with her, right, and Jibril came, right, and he said he's here, the being he's here in this room, right, and Sayyidah Khadijah, she just lifted her veil back, right, she exposed her hair. Right, so and then she asked him, so is the being still here? And then he said, no, it's gone. Then she said, okay, it's an angel. Right, it's because if it was a devil, right, it would have no shyness with me showing part of my aura and being close to you. Right, but because it's an angel, right, the moment I began to open up, right, part of my clothing, right, of her shawl, of her hair, right, it became too shy to be in our presence, right, and he went away. Right, so shyness is angelic lah, right? And the devil, they're not shy. They want to see your aurat as much as they want, and they will play with your aurat, right? So the devils, like disgusting guy. Right, so basically, she ran down. I want to finish saying Amina, but Muhammad. All right, so she ran down. So she basically they went to the kahin, right? They went to the soothsayer to know, right? What happened to this child? Right, and when they went there, right, and the soothsayer saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the same thing actually happened. The soothsayer said, right, this child, right, we need to kill him. Right, so same story, all of them. Right, we need to kill him, right, because he's going to take over the entire of Arabia. He's going to be a king over all of you. We need to kill him. Right, and of course, Sayyidah Halimah, she's heard this how many times. So, and he began to shouting out loud, right, saying that you need to kill this child. Right, and she quickly, grabbed Rasulullah and she ran off. Right, so then she was still, worried what was going on. So eventually her husband said, you know what, bring him back to his mother. Right, just bring him back to his mother. Right, so because we don't know what happened, right, we don't know how he is like actually. Right, so it's unclear to them, right, what just happened. So they said, okay, we're going to bring him back to his mother. So they took him, they brought him back down to Sayyidah Amina, and Sayyidah Amina, of course, surprised. Right, you came down, you were so adamant about keeping him with you, right, and suddenly out of nowhere you want to send him back. Right, something must have happened, right? So she said, so she asked Sayyidah Halimah first, what happened? Tell me what happened. Then she said, no, we just, we just thought it's time, it's like the disease in Mecca is gone, right, and it's just time for him to go back to his family, right? So we thought it's nice now for him to go back to his family. He was at the age of 4, around 4 of almost 5 at this point, right? So he had lived with her for about 2 more years, right, from that point, right? So at the age of 4 lah, he went back to his mother at the age of 4, right? So so Sayyidah Aminah, of course she knows something happened lah. Something must have happened, right? So she probed, right? She pushed and she pushed and she pushed. Eventually Sayyidah Halimah, she gave in, right? And she told her what happened, right? Everything lah, told her what happened. And then Sayyidah Aminah said, are you afraid over him, right? Over this boy? Said Sayyidah Halimah, are you afraid over this boy? And then are you afraid over him? That the shaitan might get to him. So Sayyidah Aminah could see what was the fear about. She said, are you afraid of him? The shaitan has gotten to him. And Sayyidah Halimah said, yes, I'm afraid that it was the shaitan, like who bothered him in the mountains, right? And Sayyidah Aminah said, Kalla wallahi, right? Never, I swear by Allah, never. Allah will not allow the shaitan to have a way to this boy. Right? So she says, وَكَلَّ وَاللَّهِ مَا لِلشَّيْطَانَ عَلَيْهِ مِنْ سَبِيلٍ. Right? There is no way for shaitan to get to this boy. And shaitan knows it. Right? He knows he can't get to this boy. Right? وَإِنَّ لِبُنَيَّ لَشَأْنٌ عَظِيمٌ. And Sayyidah Aminah said, for surely I know, this son of mine, he has a great destiny. Right? She knew, right, as a mother. And then she said, أَفَلَا أَخْبِرُكِ خَبْرُهُ. Right, so she says that, shouldn't I tell you something about him? Right, some part of his news. So Sayyidah Halimah had her share, of what she saw. So now she's telling Sayyidah Aminah, like, what's going on. And so Sayyidah Aminah is going to tell her what she has seen. So it's 2 women who are discussing the matter. Right? They are seeing these things. Right, so Sayyidah Halimah said, Bala, right, of course, tell me, right, about his affair, his issue. Right, tell me about what's with this boy. And Sayyidah Aminah said, رَأَيْتُ حِينَ حَمَلْتُ بِهِ. Right, so when I was pregnant with him, this is what I saw. Right, when I was pregnant with him, أَنَّهُ خَرَجَ مِنِّي نُورُ أَضَاءَ لِي قُصُورَ بَصْرَ مِنْ أَرْضِ الشَّامِ. Right, then when I gave birth to him, right, I saw the lights very clear, right, on the horizon, to the point I could see the castles of Basra, right, all the way into Syria. Right, I could see it so clear, right, into Sham. ثم حملت به فوالله ما رأيت من حملي قط كان أخف ولا أيسر منه. Right, so he says that, and then she said, when I was pregnant with him, the entire pregnancy was so light and it was so easy. I've never seen anybody, right, who had this kind of pregnancy. Everyone complains about something in pregnancy, right, but for her, nothing. Right, it was so light. And then she said, وَوَقَعَ حِينَ وَلَدْتُهُ وَإِنَّهُ لَوَاضِعْ يَدِهِ بِالْأَرْضِ رَافِعٌ رَأْسَهُ إِلَى السَّمَاءِ. Right, so he says that, right, so she says that, when I gave birth to him, right, he came out of me, right, with his hands on the ground, meaning in sujud. Right, and then he raised his head to the sky, and he pointed to the sky. But she didn't relate what did he say at this point. So she told Sayyidah Halimah, that she saw all these things about this boy. This boy has a very great destiny. Definitely, there is no doubt about his destiny. Right, and then she said, Da'ihi anki. Right, so leave him here. Right, leave him here with me. Wantaliqi Rashida. Right, and you may leave. You have done well. Right, so she didn't blame Sayyidah Halimah, in any way, right? But she said, leave him with me, I will look after him. So it will be 2 years whereby Rasulullah will live with his own mother, right? And she took care of him very well. They knew about him, right? His grandfather knew about him, right? So they would always guard over him, right? And eventually, inshallah, next week we will go into the death of Sayyidah Aminah, right? Because it will be 2 years, right? He will be 6 years old. So even if as a toddler, right, as a baby in the crib, he could remember events that happened around him, right? So all the more, the death of his mother, right, was as clear, as any adult would remember, right, the death of someone in their life, right? So he remembered exactly how his mother fell sick, and he remembered exactly how she passed away, and what she said to him when she passed away. Right, so this inshallah we will cover this next week, inshallah. Sometimes I wish I can just show you all like how Habib Umar teaches, because it's just so mashallah. Right, because the entire story of Saydatina Amina and how she passed away, is very moving, right, between her and her son, because she passes away in the middle of a desert, right, at Abwa, right, then there was nobody around. It was just her, him, and Baraka was there, right, Baraka al-Habashiyah, right, Baraka the slave girl that belonged to his father. So Baraka was a slave girl. Just speak a bit about Baraka, because you will mention her a bit more from this point on. So Baraka Ayman, right, she was a young girl, right, maybe age of 12, 13, right, when she entered the household of Abdul Muttalib. Right, so they bought her and she was a slave girl in the household. She was from Habasha, from Abyssinia, right, a slave girl. So when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so when Sayyidina Abdullah married Sayyidina Amina, right, Baraka was given as a gift, right, by Abdul Muttalib to Abdullah. Right, so he gave her as a gift to his own son. So now she became the possession of Abdullah. Right, it's Abdullah's property. Right, so when Abdullah passed away, right, she became Sayyidina Amina's property. Right, and she was looking after Sayyidina Amina throughout her pregnancy. Right, she was the one who was basically always there, right, with Sayyidatina Amina. Right, so she was very much loved by the family, right, and she was very much respected by the family. Right, she was a young girl of the age of at this point 14, right, a teenager, right, who was helping Sayyidina Amina in the house. When Rasulullah SAW was born, right, she loved Rasulullah very, very much, right, and took him to be as if her own, right, but she never witnessed him. Right, but she was basically his property from his father. Right, so there is a connection. Right, she is considered to be of a slave girl. Right, that is from the property of his father that went to him. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right, so she looked after him like as if she is her own son. Right, and he loved her very much in his childhood. Right, all the way till his adulthood, she outlived him. So Rasulullah when she passes away and she's still alive. So she was a very old woman, and the Sahaba used to frequently visit Sayyidina Abu Bakr, Sayyidina Umar after the death of Rasulullah. They would go to Ayman, right, who is Barakah, her other name, right, they would go to her, right, and they would remember the days of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam together, right. So she loved Rasulullah from she was in the family from before, right, from the point of before Sayyidina Abdullah was married, right. So she was in the family the entire time. And she loved Rasulullah very, very much, to the point where Rasulullah, he would say, whenever he would see her, he would say, this is Ayman, and Barakah, Ayman. She is the mother after my mother. Right? She's like my second mother, right, to me. Right? So, subhanAllah, she was one, right, that Rasulullah took as his mother, right, and the other woman that whom he took as his mother was also the wife of Abu Talib, right, Fatima bint Asad. Right, so she also, Rasulullah would say of her, right, that she is also my mother after my mother. Right, so you see there are women in his life, right, that they were very strong characters. Right, they looked after him, right, they cared for him. Right, so Fatima bint Asad, right, she entered into Islam, right, before even consulting her husband. And she said herself, she relates, that I never did anything without asking Abu Talib his permission or consulting him. But when Muhammad came with the message, I believed, right, without even asking him, right, or asking his permission. So then I told him that I have believed, right, and he allowed me. Right, that means she was given the permission, right, by him to be Muslim, for her to be Muslim. Right, so she is of the mothers of Rasulullah, the mothers lah, right, of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Sayyidina Amina of the mother, Sayyidina Halima of the mothers of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Barakah Ayman, who was so basically the only like mother by mahram was his own mother, Amina and Halima. Right, mother by care, right, was Barakah Ayman, right, and Fatima bint Asad. Right, these are the four. And he himself, Rasulullah, when Fatima bint Asad passed away, he himself went down into her grave, right, to bring her in, right, because he treated her as if she was his mother, right. Yeah. Because sometimes we read the story and that his uncle looked after him, right? So when the uncle looked after him, the wife has to be around. Right? The wife has to be the one doing all the work. Right? So she's around. Right? And she was very, very, very much beloved to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Very beloved. Right? Abu Talib. Yeah. She converted. She immediately converted. He Allahu alam. Right? During the majority of the seerah, right, it is related that he did not convert. Right? But Allah, we never know. Only the day of judgment we actually will know whether he did do it secretly and then he died on Islam or he did not. So like even the scholars of Hadramaut, they refrain on commenting on Abu Talib, right? Because on the outward, there is no record that he converted, right? But we never know on what they secretly hide in their hearts, right? Out of the fear of society. Right, so Yawm al-Qiyamah we will see.
What is the ruling for wife to be Muslim and the husband if he is not Muslim during Rasulullah's time? Was it a ruling for them to leave their husband?
Initially, right, there was no ruling. Right, so if a woman was Muslim, for the example of Zainab, the daughter of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? So she of course, the moment her father got the message, she was a believer lah. Right, and the same thing with Fatima bint Asad. Right, so initially there was no rule about that. Right, they were allowed to be married to their mushrik husbands, right, to their polytheistic husbands. Right, but thereafter, there was the law came down, right, that a believer is not to be married to a disbeliever. Right, and when that law came down, Rasulullah did send for what's his name? I forgot his name. Abul As, right? Abul As, to send Zainab. That was the husband of Zainab, right? To send Zainab to Medina, right? And to split between them, right? Because he insisted on staying a disbeliever, and she had become Muslim a long time ago, right? So when the law came down in Medina, right?
Who is this woman?
Rasulullah's daughter.
Is married to who?
Her own cousin who was not Muslim. So she... No. This was Sayyidah Khadija's nephew. So and inshallah we will go into Sayyidah Zainab's story with her husband. Because it's a very, very beautiful love story between them. Right? They were married before the wahyu. Right? So they were actually married from before. Right? And he loved her very, very, very much. Right? And they were cousins lah. And they were very close. Right, so when Rasul got the wahyu, it's going long story, when Rasul got the wahyu, right, and Abu Jahal was going around, Abu Lahab was going around, trying to make things miserable for Rasulullah as far as they can. So of the things they tried to do, right, was to get all of his daughters rejected. Right, because in the society that was the worst, there was a form of ihana, it's a form of hina. It's a form of disgracement, right, of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right, so when they went to Abu Lahab, of course Abu Lahab's sons immediately they divorced Sayyidah Ruqayyah and Sayyidah Kulthum. They divorced her, immediately, and then they went to Abul As, right, bin Rabi', right, that's his name, Abul As bin Rabi'. Right, they went to him and said, divorce Zainab. Right, divorce Zainab and we'll give you any woman in Quraysh. They're the most beautiful, the most, the best lineage and the most money and whatever you want. Just divorce Zainab, right? To bring, so that you send his daughters back to his house and he will be occupied with his daughters. And he cannot do da'wah. Right? And so basically they had all these plans that they were doing. Right? And Abu As, right, he said a famous statement. Right? And he said, you give me any woman in this world, I will not leave Zainab. Right? He was so in love with her. He never married over her. Right? If she was just her, it was just her. He never married another one. Right? So it did break it broke his heart and her heart when eventually Islam separated between them. They had to separate. Right? He refused to believe initially. Eventually he does convert. He does convert eventually, and he is reunited with his wife, like in a beautiful reunion, right, with his wife in Medina. But it will be only 1 year, and then his wife passes away. Yeah. The separation was a few years. So they can the separation was quite a number of years.
What I'm curious is, was there any evidence that Abu Talib's wife was separated from him after the ruling came?
That is, I have to check because I'm not sure if she passed away before the ruling. She might have passed away before.
Because if, let's say, the ruling came and she did not separate, that means he was a Muslim.
Allahu alam. Or it could be that he just kept her with him. Allahu alam, Allahu alam. But actually, you know what? Think about it. He passes away before the migration. The ruling came down after migration.
Oh, okay.
So he would have passed away. Right? So he would have, I think he passes away before the ruling came down. Because the ruling came down after migration to Medina. That one I know for sure. It came down after migration. And he for sure passed away before migration. Right? So she would have been free of his marriage lah, to her. Right? So whether or not she passes away before or after, and we know that
She was with him throughout his life.
yes, and then he passes away. So even if the ruling came down later on, she's not married. Yeah, she's a widow. Yeah, she would have been a widow, or unless she passed away before the ruling came down. Allahu alam. Right, so but if I'm not wrong, yeah. But Rasulullah was the one who buried her. So most likely, you know,
What was her name?
Fatima bint Asad.
Fatima binti Asad.
صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. الفاتحة. أن الله يرزقنا العلم النافع والعمل الخالص المقبول وحسن التعالي والهدى ويسر بذلك قبل نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإلى أرواح معالمنا مشايخنا وذوي الحقوق علينا وإلى حضر النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. الفاتحة.